I would like to provide you with a little context for today's discussion on the harsh realities and SOGI change efforts in Africa and their impact on LGBTIQ lives. So Outright Action International carried out a research to establish the global reach on so-called conversion therapy or SOGI change practices. And this report was released in 2019, and our findings suggested that efforts to repress, change, cure diverse sexual orientations and gender identities were occurring nearly everywhere in the world. Although the practice of the so-called conversion therapy has been well documented in the Western world, no study has been undertaken to characterize the nature and extent of these damaging and degrading practices locally. So through our ongoing project in Africa, Outright Action International is working with local organizations who are doing amazing work on the ground in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa to establish the nature and extent of SOGI change practices towards a complete ban of the same in Africa. So today, we are joined by our partners from the Initiative for Equal Rights in Nigeria, the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya, and Access Chapter 2 from South Africa to SOGI changes in the African context. So I will go ahead and introduce the panel for today. And we have Lorna Diaz, a media consultant, social justice activist with 15 years experience in policy engagement and advocacy around governance, human rights, and HIV. She is currently the executive coordinator of Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya. Welcome, Lorna. We have Dr. Patrick Mthombeni, who is the Development Policy and Monitoring and Evaluation Manager for Access Chapter 2. His research interests cover diverse topics that have direct policy implications, such as gender and sexuality, protection of LGBTIQ human rights, and LGBTIQ social identities. He is a PhD candidate at Ghent University in Belgium. Welcome, Patrick. Next, we have Zina Mohammed, a lawyer, technologist, community organizer, and digital security trainer with over a decade of experience working on human rights issues in different sectors across the world. Zina is currently the executive director of Tears, a feminist-led LGBTIQ organization based in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, Zina. And last but not least, we have Professor Anthony Brown, an associate professor in teacher education and deputy head of department in the Department of Educational Psychology at the University of Johannesburg. His teaching experience, over 16 years, focused on inclusive education, life orientation, as well as HIV education in secondary schools. So thank you so much and welcome to our panelists, and looking forward to very intriguing discussions with you all. So as we move on to the first question for this discussion, so Lorna, Zina, and Patrick, your organizations have carried out research and are actually in the process of carrying out research on the nature and extent of conversion practices in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And in some instances, you have also documented cases of conversion practices. So could you kindly share with us your preliminary findings on SOGI change efforts in your countries? And I think I would first pose this question to Lorna from Kenya to respond, and then Zina, and then Patrick. Lorna, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and it's such a great pleasure to be here with Zina, Anthony, and Patrick. Yeah, we definitely need to meet up face to face and stop with this COVID restriction business. So, right, so, oh, good heavens. Yvonne, would you mind just repeating the end part of your question again?
You can share with us
about research.
Yeah, if you preliminary findings on the SOGI change effort in your countries. So what form is this taking in your countries? What are the drivers, perpetrators? Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
So now, in the absence of state protections in Kenya, GALC, the organization that I'm working for, has been compelled to establish its own emergency security response mechanism to deal with insecurity incidents against LGBTIQ plus people based on their known or perceived identities. Now that has hold that thought because it has implications going forward. Now, further enforcing some of our community members back to the homes of their hostile blood relatives, COVID restrictions have exposed them to an added layer of vulnerability and exposure. So what we have had to deal with in terms of cases thus far include family members threatening and in some cases actually carrying out threats such as forced marriage, detention under lock and key, thrashings. I won't call them beatings because beatings sounds so lame. Thrashings, confiscation of communication tools, deliverance sessions or being prayed over, eviction, definitely evictions from homes, and in the process, malicious destruction of personal belongings, abduction into rehab camps for cleansing rituals, and in some cases, threats of death. So yeah, the perpetrators, what we have seen thus far are family members, faith leaders, unevolved psychological counselors and psychiatrists, note the use of the word unevolved, and more to a large extent, conflicted individuals that are grappling with internal challenges of acceptance given the environment from which they come. When you ask what's driving the practice, well, we have the fact that there are no regulations protecting people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity in this country. As aptly highlighted by the Outright International report, the conflicted perspectives societally and individually around current myths fuel rejection and condemnation, leading to the demand of LGBTIQ plus people, their families, faith communities, and the wider society actively seeking conversion practices. Another whopper of a driver is America's culture wars and the continued presence of US evangelicals working with Christian groups in Kenya and their insidious push to deny homosexuality as a human right. Over all of this, we have this umbrella of an authoritarianism wave that has picked up and is forcefully driving an anti-gender campaign globally. So those are the things that are driving conversion practices in this country, or even attempts at conversion therapy in and of itself. Yeah, so I believe that might have answered your question from me without taking too much time.
Yes, thank you very much, Lorna. Stayed well within the time limits that you have been given. But yes, you have provided us with quite a bit of information around, of course, the impact, which is very staggering when you see of situation that individuals have to go through in terms of forced marriage, evictions, abductions. These are all very, very concerning. But also when you mention the drivers of these practices, and some of them are actually some of these individuals or some of these practices are being driven by individuals who are not even within our jurisdiction. When you talk about the evangelicals who are working with the Christian leadership. So I think those are quite interesting, and I would like to hear more about that about this discussion from Zina and the Nigerian context. So Zina, kindly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zina, and I work at TIERS, which is the Initiative for Equal Rights, an LGBT organization based here in Lagos, Nigeria. And we have been conducting very similar research to the one being conducted by our friends all around the continent. We had a conversation with about 2,000 queer people from the beginning of the year, asking them what their experiences have been around conversion therapy. And 49% of people said that they have been victims of conversion practices. Now, that's almost 50% of most queer people in Nigeria. That is an absurd number for people to have to experience an unproven attempt to change one's sexual orientation or gender identity. Interestingly, of the 51% of people who said that they had not experienced conversion practices themselves, they knew at least 29% of people who had been through conversion practices. People had gone through various types of conversion practices, including physical deprivation, religious practices that included institutionalization in churches or in places that they were just held for weeks and months on end, beatings, torture, forced marriages, and many common practices which queer people unfortunately have had to go through over the world. As some of the drivers of conversion therapy, the biggest driver, as we found from speaking to queer people in Nigeria, is religious groups. Unfortunately, this is one of the ways in which religious groups raise their profiles by profiling queer people and attempting to cure them, and where they end up with these viral videos online of praying and laying hands on individual and saying that this is something that has been proven to take out the demon of homosexuality, and people have changed as a result of their intervention. Families have been seen to deliberately introduce their wards or their friends and loved ones to processes of conversion practices. About 45% of conversion practices was initiated by family members and loved ones, but also a large number, about 1 in 3 people, over 27% of people actually sought out conversion practices themselves. Speaking to people, this was as a result of them saying that they had seen or experienced situations where they had situations where people told them that they had been cured after experiencing conversion therapies, or that they had seen advertisements, either flyers or on the internet or on TV, saying that a prophet is able to cure people from homosexuality. Over 30 respondents said that they had gone through conversion practices more than one time. So just taking a step back and talking to people as to what have been the effects of conversion practices, one of the biggest things is the breakdown of family relationships. People no longer trust their family members who have either introduced them or initiated conversion practices to them. A lot of people have also lost faith with religion. Many people who had been through religious conversion therapy said that they no longer felt safe in the hands of people who were connected to their religion. So many people left either practice of Islam or practicing from the church. A ton of other people also reported just age-long internalized homophobia, where they're unable to reconcile themselves with their sexuality because they've just been told over time that they were wrong, that their sexual orientation or gender identity was wrong, and so therefore they just could not get past that, as this was something that was reinforced again and again. And then some percentage of people also reported just ongoing mental health issues where they constantly deal with depression, of not having people who understand them or who speak to them because they're constantly demonizing them and telling them that what they need to do is go through either a psychosocial evaluation so that they can change, or they need to go through aversion therapy where you're supposed to hate the sin and love the sinner. So lots of very problematic lifelong effects that people are dealing with from going through conversion practices. And so the impact has been terrible, and we've been trying to have conversations with both religious groups and medical groups. And one of the things that has come out from talking to students who are studying either medicine or psychiatry, who are wanting to be counselors going forward, or psychologists, is that the fact that homosexuality is not pathologized, is not taught in schools. So students up until 2020 are being told that you can actually teach people or counsel people out of being LGBTQ. There's also a large group of people who continue to be able to advertise conversion therapies, as Lorna said, because there are no protections for people. Family members also overwhelmingly believe that it is their place to intervene when they have a member of their family who identifies as LGBT. So these are some of the impacts that have just been driving the acceptance of conversion therapy, because it's very common in Nigeria and people think that that is okay. So I'll stop here, and then I'll be happy to answer other questions later.
Thank you, Zina. And I think the figures that you're giving us are very concerning when you talk about 49% of the respondents victims of conversion practices. I think that's very sad. But you've also mentioned that it's something that is prevalent and driven by religious groups, to a point where they're essentially advertising it and using actually propagating the negative impact of their acts on LGBTIQ individuals and even their families, because these are things that actually spread through beyond the individual. So Patrick, why don't we hear a little bit more about the situation in South Africa? I mean, South Africa being the only country of the two, Kenya and Nigeria, that has constitutional protection for individuals. Make the situation in your country any different from what we've heard from our colleagues in Kenya and Nigeria?
Thank you very much, Yvonne. There are small commonalities that my colleagues touched on, which is something as Access Chapter 2 we also found here in South Africa. But overall, what we notice is that a tolerance dividend towards sexual difference has developed, particularly over the last 25 years in South Africa. At the same time, the intersectionality of age, sexuality, geographical location, and social space continuously shapes the everyday lived experiences of LGBTI plus individuals. And within this, South Africa has experienced an improved attitude from mainstream society, LGBTI plus community. However, this improvement rarely embraces the social realities of the LGBTI plus persons who on a daily basis have to negotiate their social existence based on their sexuality, their gender identity, and their gender expression. Even though, Yvonne, as you mentioned, South Africa holds a globally recognized which protects the human rights of LGBTI plus persons not to be discriminated based on their sexual orientation or gender identity, the LGBTI plus persons in reality still face an enormous battles in their everyday lived experiences. One of the battles that we found within the LGBTI plus persons in South Africa, which is not legally recognized, is conversion practices, also referred here in South Africa as reparative practices. Now, what we also found is that it is problematic to define conversion practices from the South African context, because the concept itself is understood more than just therapy or counseling interventions, but also social behavioral interventions, which encompasses spiritual, family, traditional, cultural, community, and or religious interventions. Therefore, conversion practices experienced by the LGBTI plus persons continuously affect their everyday social interactions and social performativities. In South African context, conversion practices takes different formats, such as cognitive therapy, which is psychological, which has focused on changing the irrational cognitive blocks against heterosexuality, and behavioral interventions, which they stem from religious sexual assaults, harassment such as corrective rapes, and or traditional or cultural interventions. And in some cases also, there are a lot of family interventions. Thus, conversion practices in the religious spheres in South Africa, with an exception of minor religious spaces in South Africa, which the LGBTI plus persons have claimed those spaces, do not advocate for acceptance and normalization of sexual differences within these religious spaces. In most cases, once the religious leader discover about the individual same-sex orientation, the LGBTI plus person automatically gets outcasted from that particular space, and sometimes both with their family. If they hold a prominent position within that religious space, in some cases, they are then asked to step down in order to shame them and their families. In addition to some of the conversion practices in South Africa, it's sexual assault and or sexual harassment, intimidation and humiliation by community members. And in some instances, family members are used as a form to change or convert an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity. Other examples of conversion practices, even just to close, which are very much unregulated as attempts to convert LGBTI plus persons and still largely practiced in South Africa. They include arranged and forced marriages and cultural initiation schools for young girls and young boys. Yeah, I'll end there, Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I think what is interesting to note or to see is that despite the constitutional legal protection that South Africa has, conversion practices are still prevalent within the society, and that those legal protections have really not put in place any kind of cushioning or protection for LGBTIQ plus individuals who still have to go through these battles, as you've said, every single day of their lives. I think I want to move on from there and bring in the perspective from a survivor and get an understanding of what conversion practices or SOGI change practices really does to individuals who have to go through them and continue to live their day-to-day lives. So I will move over to you and just ask if you could share with us your experience with conversion practices and how you faced and continue to face or deal with the negative trauma that you experienced during that time. Anthony?
Thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you for having me as part of the panelists. I would like to latch on to what Zina has said earlier or mentioned earlier, that conversion therapy is not a once-off incident. It is not a one approach that is normally applied to an individual. But in my case, it was a series of events to convert my sexual orientation expression that aligns with normative sexuality identities. And so as far as I can remember, I was about 12 years old when I had my first experience. I was called names. I was part of a church group, the church group. I'm not going to mention the church name. And I was too much of a soft type of boy. And in this church, you have a confession practice. And one of the things that I was subjected to was to go and confess my sins so that this demon that has inhabited my body could leave my body, and then I could then perform as any other expected male would perform. And unfortunately, at that age, I didn't understand. I was made to feel that there's something very wrong with me, with my behavior, with the way I talk and the way I walk. And I started to hate myself as much as I can. I later on learned about other, because I went through the confession, and the feelings and expressions and behavior that was non-normative never left me. And the bullying, the name calling, the discrimination carried on for years. I learned about Pentecostal churches, and in where I come from, they are almost a hierarchy higher in the hierarchy, as if they are a little bit more spiritual within the religious practices. And so I left my Orthodox church and I moved to a Pentecostal church. When I joined the Pentecostal church, I again told them about feelings that I have for the same sex and the attractions that I have through various practices in religion, oils and waters and all sorts of other things that I had to do to release this demon. But this demon seemed to have been so strong in my body. And the more the church struggled to get rid of this demon in me that makes me not to be normal, the bigger or the stronger the hatred grew for myself. I became depressed, I hated myself, and I became suicidal at the age of 16 years old. At that, I realized there's nothing I could do but just to focus on my schoolwork because all else is not working. I met a friend who said to me, you know what, this behavior of yours can be changed by a traditional healer, a witch doctor. And so I went to a traditional healer who gave me all sorts of potions. And hey, Yvonne, it did my body. And I thought I was the worst kind of person that exists because all sorts of efforts and strategies that were used and have been claimed to have worked for others are not working for me. And so I must be a very, very, very bad person. And so I carried on living until somebody said to me, you know what, you need to get married. The moment you get married to a woman, all of this effeminate, non-heterosexual behaviors and feelings and attractions will disappear. And you know what? I did get married to a woman. I was more depressed. Fortunately, it was the most loving person I've met in my life, very supportive. And at one stage, after 10 years of marriage, and he broke into my email and found my chats with a whole lot of other men. She then contacted through her research to save her marriage. She came across a group. They called themselves Conversion Therapy for LGBT Groups. And I went to this group and I was subjected to all sorts of therapy. It never went away. I ran almost in front of a train because I just couldn't. The long and short of this is I lived a life of almost 30 years in depression, self-hatred, rejection of the self, and until I made this decision to say, look, this is who I am. I need to let go, and I need to let go of you, my dear wife, so that you can live your life and I can live my life. And it ended there. I'm a much happier person because I embraced my sexual orientation. And today I do a lot of talk with men who are getting married with the belief that they can be cured from none. So just in a nutshell, these were my experiences, but a long, painful experience. It affects every part of your life. I was a student for many years. It affects your studies, your relationship with your own family, it affects your relationship with friends, and then also the self-hate with for so many years. In a nutshell, that was my experience.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for being really candid and sharing with us your experience. And I think what I take away from that is the last statement that you have made, that this is something that has happened. It's a series of events that have happened over a very, very long period of time and has affected every facet of your life and brought you to a position or a space where you experience so much self-hatred. And it's very sad to hear that these are the things pushed for by individuals or are being sought out by individuals who are desperate to have to experience some change that they have been made to believe that is the norm. I think from there I wanted to move on to our next set of questions, and I'll just give you all just a minute to respond to this next question. In recognition of the negative impact of the SOGI change practices, a number of countries have led a pushback against these practices within their jurisdictions. For example, Germany, Malta, and Brazil, who have put in place various legal protections to ensure that these practices are no longer happening within their jurisdictions. Do you think that this is something that we will ever be able to achieve in Africa? So maybe just one recommendation of what we need to do to be able to achieve this in Africa. Maybe I'll start with Zina, and just a minute each, and then we can move on to the Q&A session. So Zina.
Hi, Yvonne. I think that one recommendation is really limiting me because I have a ton of recommendations, right? I think one of the first and most important thing is that we need to decriminalize homosexuality. It's what makes it look like what we're doing is wrong or who is wrong, and that needs to be removed and our full humanity recognized. I think that even if we don't have laws yet banning conversion therapy and practices, what we can do is expand and extend existing laws within countries to protect LGBT people, because we're not excluded from the laws for banning things like torture, cruel and inhuman treatment, laws that promotes the dignity and privacy of people, freedom of and from religion. So these laws exist and they need to be expanded to cover us. We need to remove basically the secrecy around this and expose the groups who continue to push conversion practices, because it's usually done in secret and they have no skills and it hasn't ever been proven to work. And we need to ensure that LGBT people are at the forefront and own the narrative around this instead of the people who are the perpetrators of this very cruel and inhuman treatment. And I think that also we need to challenge negative media, right? That tells people that who they are is wrong, and that gives people a platform to continue to push for this conversion practices. I know that certain platforms have started banning conversion practices and advertising it, and we need more people to take steps like that because it's completely unacceptable. I hope that I didn't give too much and I didn't go over my time.
Well, within your 1 minute, very many within your 1 minute. Lorna, let's see if you can beat Zina. You're on mute, Lorna.
How does one even begin to follow that act? My goodness, Zina has mentioned pretty much everything. And so for me, all the recommended, for starters, we are in the process of decriminalization, and that's a really long-term process. What we would like things to go simultaneously. So simultaneous attacks from various angles, looking at all the policies that the Christian right is trying to bring in around so cross-movement organizing. So everything around anti-gender organizing is an arena that we're engaging with, so that even as we look at our own issues with the decriminalization and with putting in place protections against things like conversion practices, we are also engaging on issues around broad general sexual and reproductive health rights and things under that umbrella banner. And apart from that, Zina has pretty much covered everything, so I'll give away my time.
Okay, thank you so much, Lorna. We'll have Patrick for a minute, and then we can move on to Anthony for...
Thank you, Yvonne. I think...
Okay.
Sorry.
Patrick and then Anthony.
All right. Thank you, Yvonne. And as I was saying, I hope I stay also within my minute. On our side, Yvonne, in South Africa, and moving forward, given the various changes that we've observed in the last 25 years regarding the protection and promotion of the LGBTI+ human rights in South Africa, now the objective lies in ensuring we gather, we document, and we report all the unique individual narratives that South Africans and Africans at large, they are telling regarding convergent practices. But also we need to contextualize and localize it. Firstly, this lies in understanding convergent practices from both elements as the actual social reality, one, and two, as a hidden social performativity. Once we understand convergent practices from both approaches, we will then appreciate the harmful nature and the hidden wounds it creates for the LGBTI persons. But also, Yvonne, this is not only a civil society organization's work. We need to partner with various government structures, such as government departments, for example, traditional affairs and corporate governance. And there's something that Zina touched on, which is working in the school environment with school management teams, school governing bodies, and school principal forums as a way of promoting comprehensive sexuality education in schools, because I feel that's where the conversation needs to start. And we also need to participate in engagement spaces with different trade unions, trade and workers unions, because a large percentage of LGBTI+ persons in South Africa especially are working class, and they contribute a lot to the economy of the country. So for us as Access Chapter 2, I think let us involve the different policy stakeholders, such as parliamentarians, political parties, political chief whips, but most importantly, let's not forget the unique stories, as I said, of people, because the reason why convergent practices are not documented in Africa, it's because these stories are not reported and they are not published. So we lack literature on conversion. Thank you.
So much, Patrick. Anthony, would you like to close for us with your recommendations in 1 minute before we move on to our Q&A
work
session?
in a university where we are. I work in a university where we are training professionals, and often we find that conversion therapy, whatever it means in terms of therapy, is practiced by professionals. It's psychologists, it's counselors, it's religious leaders. And I think what is important is that the harmful practices and the impact that conversion practices have on individuals should be part of the curriculum when we train these professionals. Is it part of the training to show the harmful realities and impact of such thinking and practices within that particular trade or domain in which they practice? That's the one. Then also, for many of you who are doing research within this area would have noticed that conversion therapy is something that starts way in childhood. And as Dr. Ntomani has already mentioned, that we need to start with comprehensive sexuality education and show the harmful practices from a childhood or from youth level already, working with teacher education, working with parents, working with various institutions that is linked to youth studies and the education of youth in the different ecologies to support them to undo these harmful practices. So yes, lastly, I think this is something that we need to come up with policies at school level already so that we can undo this and spread, because school in an African context is a very central institution to the rest of the social ecologies that we find in our communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Patrick, Zina, Anthony, and Lorna for this discussion. We have a few questions that have come through. I will just read them and we can take a few minutes to respond to them. So I'll just read out the questions and who to direct to. So for Lorna, you have a question. We would like to ask, what programming has GALC put in place, especially for queer refugees living in Kenya? We have tried to organize ourselves as queer refugees, but the obstacles are very many given our refugee status, and also because Kenya itself has laws directed against queer persons. I'm assuming that question is in response to, is specific to the conversion practices discussion that we are having, and not broadly the work that, but that's for you to respond to, Lorna. A question for Zina. Any data on who is most affected by the who is most affected in the LGBTIQ communities? Is based on the research findings. Another question, can changes occur without norm changes within the social, cultural, religious, and legal structural prejudices against LGBTIQ people on the continent? Maybe Patrick, I'll let you respond to that. If you need the question, I will post it for you in your chat. And then we have the last question. How much of this oppression is financed by American churches that benefit from tax-exempt contributions? Is there any potential to change US tax law to end the tax exemption for these activities? Don't know who would like to respond to that question. Would that be okay with you, Anthony? Okay, good. So Lorna, we'll start with you. Lorna, okay. Zina, Patrick, and then Anthony. Yeah, maybe 2 minutes.
Let me see if I can keep it very brief. Thank you very much. And thank you to the representative who posed the question. So now with the Gay and Lesbian Coalition of Kenya, it is a membership umbrella body, and therefore it programs around member organizations in Kenya. So now our ethos, our sort of bedrock of programming is around self-efficacy. So what we do with all our member organizations is we provide them with skills, and we provide them with information, and we provide them with knowledge in order for them to then take on the issues that are contextually relevant to them. So now for the queer refugees in Kenya, there are a number of things that we have done since 2014, when the Uganda situation became untenable. And that was, number one, we engaged in collaborative engagements with embassies, so diplomatic missions, funding partners, the refugees themselves, their leadership, and in order to find a way forward that was comfortable for everyone. The next thing that we did was we then more recently provided a security training for the refugees' leadership, so that they themselves could determine their security status, which is what we do with our own members and with our security teams out there. And so thus far, we have not heard any requests. We have not received any requests from the refugees around security issues, but our security mechanism caters to all. For me, this particular question feels a little bit broader than the CP discussion, than the conversion therapy discussion. However, security being an issue, and because we respond the way we do, we have received cases where some of our refugee brothers and sisters have been attacked, and we do try to engage, but it's a complicated situation simply because it's the Kenya government, the acronym has flown out of my head. The Kenya government, UNHCR was involved, HIAS was involved, and so that is something that is outside of our mandate. We do corporate social responsibility activities. So when we have news that there are certain individuals that are looking for placements, we look to provide them with placements and provide them with small stipends. And so we try to do our best around this particular issue. But as far as security is concerned, and it's not so much related to conversion practices, responses, we have things in place for our refugees, and we have provided them with the ability to engage their own systems and their own structures as best that they can with our help.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Zina, moving on. The question that you had, that was.
I think I had answered it writing down, but yeah, some of the things that we noticed straight off the bat is that gay men and trans women were more likely to face torture, beatings, institutionalization, and just really cruel and degrading treatment, while queer women were more likely to be forced into marriages and to be pushed into aversion therapy. I just wanted to say that when it comes to media, which is the next question that was posed, I think media is such an important space because media transcends and goes over time and space, and people have access to it all over the world. And a lot of work that has been done in the past to demonize queer people was done in the media. So we also have to take up space within that and to tell our stories and to be the drivers in that space.
Okay, Thank you so much, Zina. Would you like me to repeat the question for you, Patrick?
Yes, please. Yeah, I slightly got it, but I didn't get the full question.
Okay. Can changes occur without norm changes within the social, cultural, religious, and legal structural prejudices against LGBTIQ people on the continent?
Wow. This is quite a not easy question to answer, and I don't think I have one answer for it. But just in short, Yvonne, is that change on practical level, taking social realities, and this, I mean, context-specific social realities, it needs multi-sectoral engagements. So without that, then we cannot change even a single norm. Yeah. Yvonne?
Patrick, you still there?
Yes, yes, no, I'm done.
Okay, okay, thank you so much, Patrick. The question to you is how much is financed churches that benefit from tax-exempt contributions? Is there any potential to change US tax law to end the tax exemption for these activities? And yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you for. I think it's a very pertinent and very important question, Yvonne. Ironically, last week we had a long conversation with the Department of Education on this particular matter. What we have noticed across Southern Africa and Eastern Africa is that there's a big infiltration of right-wing American religious institutions or religious that has moved into Africa. There's a particular movement of the pro-family group, and these are well-funded religious institutions that when they do come into Africa, they link with very powerful institutions, they link with politicians, they link with very popular church affiliations, they link with family groups, and then they spread their propaganda within the African context on how the Western world wants to introduce homosexuality or sexual diversity into the continent. And what they do is when they enter these various African countries, all their funds, they give money to these church organizations, they give money to these anti-sexual diversity organizations, and these organizations then do the work for them. So they sort of a background, backbencher movement, facilitate them with information, what to say, giving them all the resources, helping them with tools on how to come up with videos that can be spread throughout these geographies. And they are very successful in what we have noticed that many of them has facilitated with the campaign against comprehensive sexuality in Southern and Eastern Africa. And all of these are coming from right-wing religious groups and pro-family right-wing organizations in the US. In order to change the tax laws in the US, fortunately, I do not know how to address that one, but I can confirm that there's sufficient evidence that shows the practices and the operations of these right-wing organizations within the continent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony, for your response. And thank you so much to all the panelists for their expertise and insights into this discussion. So as we draw to a close on this panel discussion, I would like to thank you all for taking the time to and participate in voting outright and up. A link has been put in the chat to our post-session evaluation. Please take some time and let us know your thoughts. At this point, I would like to invite you all to join us in some of our upcoming sessions. And our next segment includes our keynote address by Gina Rochero. And after that will be a plenary on movements for liberation, LGBTIQ activism, and racial justice. We also have 3 concurrent workshops that will be coming up after that. And all that has been posted on the chat for ease of access. So thank you all. Thank you to the panelists and thank you to all the participants once again. Have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, and enjoy the rest of Out Summit.